Out here, among the wrecks the sea refuses to forget, a creature slept beneath layers of rust, slime, and barnacles. A dragon, once proud, now abandoned. Its eyes flickered open, tired, wary, and in pain. But then, a human appeared, boots heavy with history, hands skilled in understanding the forgotten, the wounded, and the impossible. Could a single human, alone against time and tide, save a dragon the galaxy had written off? If you're ready to dive into a story of courage, care, and the kind of bond you never expected between species, hit that like button, subscribe for more HFY sci-fi adventures, and share this with anyone who believes humans can surprise even the stars themselves. Stick around, because what happens next isn't just healing, it's history in motion. Darren Miles followed a faint, garbled distress signal through the fog and salt-soaked wind. The old shipyards had long been claimed by the sea, jagged ribs of sunken hulls jutting like forgotten monuments. Every step on the barnacle-covered planks threatened a slip. Every gust of wind reminded him how small a human could feel in a world built for titans. And then in a tide pool the size of a chapel he saw her. At first she looked like another wreck, curved metal plates, scarred and corroded. But when the tide shifted, the plates breathed. A dragon mother, her scales cloaked in rust, slime, and barnacles, lay half-submerged, wings splayed, eyes closed, as if sleep itself had abandoned her. Darren knelt on the grit, smelling salt, iron, and the sour tang of infection. He didn't reach too quickly. Creatures left behind forgive slowness sooner than force. A gull dared to investigate, only to retreat under Darren's quiet wave. Slowly, he traced the seams of metal embedded in her scales, the remnants of chains and collars that had bound her for years. The first heartbeat of connection passed in silence, human to dragon, wary, patient, and electric with possibility. Today, survival would require more than skill. It would demand empathy. The dragon stirred. A faint ripple across her chest hinted at breath, slow and shallow, barely enough to stir the brine. Darren held still, letting her observe him as much as he observed her. Trust wasn't given, it was negotiated moment by moment. Every muscle under those barnacle-clotted scales told a story of neglect, survival, and sheer endurance. Could a creature so enormous, so alien, sense the intent of one human? He whispered to the tide, not to her. We can do this together. Slowly, Darren eased closer, scanning the curves of her armor like scales, noting patches where corrosion had eaten through, revealing pink tissue beneath. Every inch of contact was a test. A slip of the hand could provoke panic, a gentle press could earn acceptance. A faint blink, a flicker of rose in her pale iris confirmed she was aware. Darren offered a small gesture, a hand hovering just above the barnacles, no touch yet. A question posed in patience. The dragon's nostrils flared, exhaling brackish water, a cautious acknowledgement of his presence. Something profound hung between them, a fragile recognition that she was no longer alone. The first tentative heartbeat of collaboration had begun, and with it, a possibility neither the human nor the dragon could yet measure. Darren's hands hovered over the barnacle-encrusted scales, hesitating at the first contact. Every scrape, every chain remnant embedded in her flesh, whispered of centuries of neglect. He didn't just see a dragon, he saw history, suffering, and resilience stitched into every plate of rusted armor. Slowly, carefully, he worked a thin scraper under a lip of coral-like barnacle. Each pop sounded like tiny rebellions against time and the sea itself. The dragon flinched at first, a ripple of muscle under her scales, but Darren didn't withdraw. Instead, he slowed, matched her rhythm, and allowed her to decide the pace. 1 millimeter at a time he cleared grime, revealing hints of her original colors, faint iridescent blues and muted golds hidden beneath the green-brown crust. Each sweep told him more about her. The scratches, the dents, the scars of battles fought and endured alone. A subtle shiver passed through her. She inhaled shallowly, letting him feel the pulse beneath her jaw. Darren whispered, "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to help." It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. The tension in the tide pool eased, replaced by cautious curiosity. The first touch was more than physical. It was the bridge between isolation and the tentative promise of trust. Darren knew the next step was simple in theory, almost absurdly so. Water and air. But with a creature this size abandoned and weakened, every drop mattered. He scavenged from his pack, improvising a makeshift filtration system, letting the tide offer what little help it could without drowning them both. A soft hum of machinery met the rhythm of the dragon's tentative breath, and for a moment the world narrowed to this strange communion between human and beast. He cupped a strip of warm, purified water, offering it near her muzzle without forcing her to drink. The dragon's tongue flicked, porcelain pale, tasting the gift, but not yet trusting it. Darren waited, counting the seconds as breaths deepened ever so slightly. The tide pool chapel seemed to hold its breath with them. Next came the oxygen injector, a delicate, almost absurd contraption for a creature her size, but it worked in microbursts, each measured pulse synchronized to the shallow swell of her chest. She accepted the rhythm, not blindly, but with an almost imperceptible nod of consent. In this fragile exchange, something extraordinary happened. A bond formed not through dominance or fear, but through care, patience, and the shared language of survival. One human, one dragon, one tide pool. Life could begin again, if only slowly. Just as Darren began to measure the dragon mother's recovery, a small movement caught his eye beneath her wing. A hatchling, thin and fragile, blinked up at him with eyes almost too large for its head. Its throat sacs glowed a faint, ghostly white, a gentle pulse of life amidst decay and neglect. Darren froze, recognizing the stakes had just multiplied. Now he wasn't caring for one ancient creature, but two. The mother's eye tracked the tiny shadow. She exhaled a soft, brackish puff of air, a signal of acknowledgement, perhaps even pride. Darren's hands stayed steady, hovering, letting the hatchling make the first move. It inched forward, wobbling like a newborn learning gravity, sniffing at his boots and the clean water he offered. A delicate vibration ran through the hatchling as it hummed a faint, tremulous chord, a sound that resonated through Darren's bones, embedding a strange calm. "I see you," he whispered, voice low, careful as if speaking too loud might undo what trust had been built. The mother shifted slightly, nudging her hatchling closer, and for the first time, Darren felt the weight of responsibility, not just survival, but the preservation of family, hope, and the extraordinary bond between human and dragon. The barnacles at the dragon's wing roots had grown into coral-like towers, each a stubborn monument of neglect. Darren examined them carefully, knowing that removing even a single piece too quickly could injure her further. These weren't just obstacles. They were history, built layer by the sea, binding flesh, scale, and metal into a prison of rust and salt. He warmed a small blade and began shaving the outer edges, millimeter by millimeter. Chips fell into a bowl with the faint clatter of old spoons, a rhythm that felt oddly ceremonial. Beneath the hardened layers, hints of the dragon's true form began to emerge. Subtle hues of iridescent scales, intricate patterns, and long-forgotten glyphs etched faintly into her shoulders. The mother's eye followed every movement, wide, curious, yet patient. She trembled once, just enough for Darren to feel her heartbeat beneath his palms. "Slow," he murmured to the tide and to himself. "We have time." Each scrape, each gentle coaxing of coral away from flesh was a negotiation. By the time he paused, the first crowns had been freed, revealing scars of battles fought and endured alone. Darren's chest tightened. This labor of patience wasn't just cleaning, it was uncovering identity, history, and trust, layer by layer, heart by heart. Feeding the dragon was a delicate dance. She was cautious, unfamiliar with trust, and wary of every hand that approached. Darren prepared a mixture of protein-rich slurry and nutrients, carefully warming it to mimic the environment she might recognize. He offered it not directly, but along the edge of a shallow basin, letting her decide the pace. The dragon lowered her head slowly, tongue flicking cautiously, nostrils flaring. Each swallow was measured, deliberate, a sign she was beginning to accept help. Darren counted each motion, matching his own breathing to hers. The tide pool chapel echoed with the quiet intimacy of life being restored. The hatchling, curious and bold, poked its tiny snout into the mixture, squeaking in delight. Its mother watched closely, then nudged it gently, allowing a tentative bond to form between them again. Darren smiled beneath the salt-streaked wind, marveling at the simple power of nourishment, how a small act could rebuild trust and begin to erase years of neglect. In these moments, humor and awe intertwined. The hatchling's tiny, sloppy sips contrasted with the mother's careful, regal approach. Darren realized that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about patience, empathy, and understanding the quiet language of the living. And here, amidst rust and tide, life was beginning to sing again. Darren moved deliberately, studying every inch of the dragon mother's massive form. Scale by scale, scar by scar, he traced the patterns that told stories of old battles, encounters with humans, and centuries of survival. Embedded in her flesh were remnants of chains, collars, and metal artifacts, each one a silent testament to the cruelty and neglect she had endured. He sketched her body with his hands, feeling the subtle shifts in muscle and bone beneath the barnacle-encrusted armor. Every ridge, every curve, told him where care was most needed. He found the soft, safe shelves behind her jaw and under her wings, places where he could administer aid without provoking panic. Darren also noticed the faded glyphs etched into her scales, nearly erased by time and salt water. With careful fingers, he traced the shallow lines, feeling a connection to a story older than most galaxies. He whispered each shape aloud, as if speaking might awaken memory. This mapping wasn't just preparation, it was communication. Through touch, observation, and patience, Darren translated the dragon's silent history into a living plan for recovery. Here, in the quiet cathedral of tide and wreck, the human and dragon spoke without words, bridging species, pain, and time itself. The wind whipped across the tide pool carrying salt, debris, and the faint scent of iron. Darren knew exposure could undo all progress, so he built a canopy, an improvised clinic using salvaged tarps, tent poles, and braided lines. The structure shifted and sang in the gusts, shaping the wind into a gentler cooperative force. Under its fragile shelter, Darren worked with precision. He applied heat packs, micro-injectors, and gentle antiseptics to the dragon mother's wounds. Each motion was a conversation, slow, deliberate, and full of respect. The barnacles and rust resisted, but Darren was patient. This wasn't a race. It was a negotiation with time and nature. The hatchling stayed close, leaning against Darren's boot, humming a tremulous chord that seemed to steady the room. The mother's eye followed every gesture, tracking hands that could heal or harm. By mid-morning, the tide pool cathedral smelled less of neglect and more of careful attention. Warm water, antiseptic, and the quiet hum of recovery. Darren paused to let her observe. To show stillness can be trust too. In this fragile, wind-whipped space, he realized the canopy wasn't just shelter. It was a promise. A promise that here, at least, the dragon would be safe, respected, and, perhaps, remembered. Darren adjusted the micro-oxygen diffuser, a delicate device meant for precision rather than brute force. Each pulse was measured, timed to the shallow, uneven rhythm of the dragon mother's chest. One miscalculation, and she could panic. But if done right, even the faintest breath might spark life into exhausted lungs. He pressed the trigger for a heartbeat, then another, watching closely for any sign of distress. Nothing. Her chest rose slightly, then fell with a steadier cadence. Darren allowed a faint smile, though the work was far from over. Every controlled breath was a negotiation with gravity, salt water, and centuries of neglect. The hatchling chirped softly, leaning against his wrist, its tiny hum vibrating through Darren like a reminder. Care must be patient. He soaked a cloth in warm, purified water, gently wiping the slime from her exposed plates. Each touch was a question. Can I help? The dragon's eye answered almost imperceptibly, with the smallest flicker of assent. For the first time, Darren realized this was more than a rescue. It was a collaboration. One human, one dragon working together through micro-breaths and millimeters of care. Trust, he understood, could be measured in tiny, deliberate pulses, each one a heartbeat closer to survival. For hours, Darren worked in near silence, letting the dragon mother dictate the pace. Every scrape of barnacle, every careful adjustment of the micro-injector was met with subtle feedback. A flick of an ear, a soft exhale, the tiniest shift in muscle. Consent wasn't demanded, it was earned, and he could feel it growing in the pulse beneath his fingertips. The mother's eye, once wary and tired, now tracked his movements with something like curiosity. She tolerated his hands across her massive frame, accepted the rhythm of warm water and oxygen, and even allowed a brush of gauze along the edges of embedded chains. Darren spoke softly, narrating his actions, giving context to every touch. Each word, each gentle movement seemed to reassure her. He was not an enemy, not a threat. He was here to help. The hatchling hummed against his wrist, a delicate vibration that reinforced the fragile trust building in the tide pool. Together, human and dragon had created a shared understanding, a quiet alliance in which danger was paused and care was acknowledged. By late afternoon, Darren felt it, the first full measure of trust. The dragon mother had consented silently and completely to be helped. In that moment, hope shifted from possibility to certainty. The tide had receded enough to reveal new battlements of barnacle and rusted metal, and Darren knew it was time to attempt the impossible, lifting the dragon. Not recklessly, but with strategy, precision, and patience. He traced a plan in the sand, each loop of rope, each brace, each block and tackle carefully measured. The hatchling clung to his neck, humming softly, a tiny heartbeat syncing with his own. The dragon mother watched, her immense eye tracking every movement, almost as if approving the geometry of the operation. Darren's hands adjusted lines, knots, and pulleys with meticulous care, converting chaos into a mechanical ballet. Two local fishers offered silent assistance, placing a kettle, adjusting ropes, and respecting the rhythm Darren had established. The first swell lifted the sling just a finger width. The second, stronger, nudged belly to sling rather than the other way around. Darren's breath measured in, 2 out, a pulse guiding the operation. Slowly, deliberately, the dragon began to rise, not fully airborne, but off the tide pool floor, supported by ingenuity, trust, and sheer human persistence. In that moment, Darren understood that lifting her was more than a mechanical task. It was a symbol of hope, of partnership, and of the future being reclaimed one careful movement at a time. The tide rose, urging Darren to act with even greater precision. Every wave became a partner rather than a threat, shaping the dragon's movement and testing the sling he had crafted. He adjusted lines with careful hands, letting gravity and water share the work. The dragon mother remained still, a patient collaborator in this intricate dance. The hatchling explored the ropes and rigging, humming faintly, adding its small presence to the rhythm of recovery. Darren felt the subtle push and pull of trust between all three of them, the human, the mother, and the hatchling, working together against the chaos of the sea. Each swell lifted her slightly higher, each adjustment a testament to patience and cooperation. He guided the ropes with the quiet authority of experience, never forcing, never rushing. The older fisher handed out lines at the exact moments Darren needed, while the younger braced against the tidal swell, a human fulcrum for something far larger than himself. By the time the dragon's massive form floated in balance, the tide seemed almost to pause, respecting the work that had been done. For the first time in decades, the mother dragon and her hatchling were supported entirely by their own strength, and by the careful, unwavering guidance of one human mechanic. With the dragon mother balanced in the sling, Darren finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He traced the worn glyphs etched into her scales, symbols long faded by salt and time. Each line whispered fragments of identity, of a life interrupted by neglect. Slowly, Reverently, he spoke aloud what the sea and metal could no longer conceal. "Narv," he said softly, testing the sound on his tongue, letting it drift over the tide pool cathedral. The dragon's iris flicked toward him, white rim fading to rose, acknowledging the name. The hatchling blinked up at him, pupils widening as if recognizing the truth in the word. "Narv," he repeated, steady, certain. For the first time, they were not lost relics of the past. They were remembered, known, acknowledged. The tide seemed to respond, brushing gently against the sling, carrying salt and brine in quiet approval. Darren felt the weight of his role, not just rescuer, but witness and guide to the rebirth of a family. He brushed a hand over the mother's chest, then the hatchling, and allowed the pulse of life, renewed and deliberate, to fill him with awe. In naming them, Darren sealed the fragile trust they had built, turning survival into a shared story and neglect into the first page of a new chapter. The tide had risen to meet their timing, the waves now gentle partners rather than obstacles. Darren adjusted the sling, checking each knot and pulley, every line tested against weight, gravity, and trust. The dragon mother Narv seemed to understand. Her massive body shifted slightly, flexing wings that had been dormant under rust and barnacles for years. The hatchling chirped softly, leaning against his shoulder, vibrating a tremulous hum that mirrored the pulse of the water and the mother's cautious rhythm. Darren exhaled slowly, counting, 2 in, 2 out, and lifted just enough for the tide and ingenuity to carry the rest. Inch by inch, the sling raised Narv off the tide pool floor, her body responding to the combination of trust, skill, and patience. And then, with a final gentle nudge from the swell, Narv flexed her wings fully for the first time in decades. The mother lifted, supported by air, sea, and human ingenuity, while the hatchling scrambled atop her back, tentative but eager. Darren stepped back, letting the wind fill her wings, the tide guide her rise, and the sun catch the iridescence of scales long hidden. In that first flight, all three, human, mother, and hatchling, shared a triumph of trust, cooperation, and the enduring spark of life. Neglect had been overcome. Hope had taken wing. If you love stories where humans defy the odds and touch the extraordinary, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a little wonder today.